One quiet neighborhood dispute turned into something no one expected. A man walked into his neighbor's yard and threw paint across a statue of the Virgin Mary. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. It was pure anger. And what happened afterward became a story the entire neighborhood would remember as a miracle. But before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far the stories of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Kevin Whitfield was 53 years old and had built a reputation that very few people could match. In more than 30 years of running his construction business in rural Ohio, Kevin had never lost a deal he truly wanted. It wasn't luck. It was strategy. He knew exactly when to push harder, when to raise an offer, and when to stay silent long enough for the other person to give in. Kevin believed two things about the world. Everything had a price, and every problem had a solution. If someone said no, it simply meant the offer wasn't good enough yet. But for 8 long months, Kevin had been trying to buy one property he couldn't seem to get: Dorothy Simmons' house. Dorothy lived next door, on a generous corner lot that bordered Kevin's property. If Kevin could purchase it, the value of his land would skyrocket. To him, it wasn't just another house. It was an opportunity. He approached Dorothy 3 different times. Each time he used the same careful method that had worked for decades. First, he pointed out the age of the house, then the maintenance costs, then the burden of taking care of such a large property alone. Kevin tried to make it sound logical, practical even, that selling would be the smart decision. Dorothy never agreed. Dorothy Simmons was 71 years old and had lived in that home for most of her life. She was quiet, polite, and kept to herself. The first offer Kevin made was casual. They spoke over the backyard fence on a Saturday morning. Dorothy listened politely and said she wasn't interested. The second offer came in writing with a higher number. Dorothy read it carefully, thanked him, and returned the letter. The third offer was almost unbelievable. With that money, she could have bought a modern apartment in a larger city, with money left over for years of comfort. Dorothy refused again. Have you ever tried everything to convince someone, and they still say no? That feeling that the person simply refuses to see logic? That's exactly how Kevin felt. Dorothy's yard was simple but beautifully maintained. Freshly cut grass, a small flower bed near the fence, an old tree standing quietly in the back, and at the entrance of the house stood a small statue of the Virgin Mary. It had been there for years. Dorothy cared for it the same way she cared for the rest of the yard. Kevin had seen that statue hundreds of times while leaving his house, but he had never truly noticed it. Not until that Tuesday morning in October. Kevin woke up early that day with a decision already made. He would make one final offer, a number so high that even he considered it unreasonable. If Dorothy refused this one, he would accept that the deal was impossible. At 8 in the morning, Kevin knocked on her door. Dorothy opened it holding a cup of coffee. She looked at him calmly, almost as if she had expected him to show up. "Good morning, Dorothy," Kevin said. "Please listen carefully to this proposal." "I'm listening," she replied. Kevin explained the number. He described how she could buy a smaller home, how she would never have to worry about maintenance again, how the money would secure her future. Dorothy said nothing at first. She looked down at the coffee in her hands. Then she looked back at Kevin. "Kevin, it's not about the money," she said softly. "Then what is it about?" he asked. "This house is where I got married," Dorothy said. "It's where I raised my children. My grandchildren took their first steps here, and my husband spent the final years of his life in this home." She paused before continuing. "There are more than 40 years of memories in this place. I'm not selling it. Not for that amount. Not for any other." Kevin felt the anger rise inside him. "Dorothy," he said, trying to stay calm, "one day it will become too difficult for you to take care of all this alone." Dorothy studied him quietly for a moment. Then she answered with surprising firmness. "Kevin, if that day ever comes, my family will decide what happens to this house. Not you." And with that, she closed the door. Kevin stood on the porch, stunned. No one spoke to him like that. No one. He walked back into his garage, his mind racing. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Paint cans sat stacked in the corner from the last renovation job. Kevin stared at them. Without thinking, he grabbed one. A white paint can. He walked straight into Dorothy's yard. There was no long decision. No plan. Just anger. Kevin hurled the paint at the statue. White paint splashed across the Virgin Mary's face and mantle, running down the base in thick streams. He dropped the empty can onto the grass. Then he turned and walked away. 5 seconds of anger. 30 years of reputation. And a statue standing in the yard of a woman who had done nothing wrong. From the living room window, Kevin's son Nathan had seen everything. Nathan was 26 years old. He watched his father leave the garage with the paint can. He watched the paint cover the statue. But he said nothing. Dorothy heard the noise and stepped outside. She saw the statue. She stood on the porch for a long moment. She didn't yell. She didn't knock on Kevin's door. She simply went back inside and closed hers. Life outside continued as if nothing had happened. But Kevin began avoiding the hallway window that faced Dorothy's yard. He never admitted why, but he knew what he had done. Have you ever tried to bury a mistake by working harder? Kevin tried. During the day, it almost worked. Contracts, construction sites, meetings. There was always something demanding his attention. But at night, when the house fell silent and Nathan went to bed, the memory returned. A 71-year-old woman. Her home filled with memories. And Kevin had walked into her yard and thrown paint at her statue simply because she had said no. 2 weeks later, Kevin finally went to the doctor. Nathan had been asking him for months to schedule a routine checkup. Kevin hadn't seen a doctor in 4 years. There was always an excuse. A meeting, a construction emergency, a client who couldn't wait. But that week, his schedule was strangely clear. Kevin went mostly to stop hearing Nathan insist. The doctor ordered a routine electrocardiogram. The results showed a small irregularity. Nothing alarming yet, but the doctor recommended a cardiologist. Kevin shoved the paper into a drawer in his office. 2 weeks passed before he looked at it again. When he found the referral sheet, he finally made the call. Dr. Heron Reeves practiced at a hospital 40 minutes away. Direct. Efficient. No wasted words. Kevin liked that immediately. After several tests, Kevin returned for the results. Dr. Reeves placed the files on the desk and looked serious. Kevin, he said quietly, you have an arrhythmia. Kevin waited. This isn't something we manage with medication. What kind of treatment? Kevin asked. Dr. Reeves looked him straight in the eye. Surgery. Kevin sat very still. In most cases, the procedure isn't high risk, the doctor continued. But in your case, there are a few concerns we need to consider carefully. Kevin asked only one question. When do we do it? 12 days, Dr. Reeves replied. We need a few additional tests first. Kevin left the hospital and sat inside his car. He didn't start the engine. For 15 minutes, he just stared ahead. 53 years old. 30 years building a business. Every problem in his life had always had a solution. But this time, Kevin wasn't so sure. And suddenly Kevin was facing a problem that no negotiation could fix. There was no contract to sign. No offer to increase. No way to solve it with money. For the first time in his life, he was facing something completely outside his control. Have you ever felt that way? Trapped in a situation where there is simply no move left to make. Kevin carried the diagnosis alone for nearly a week. Every day, he went to work as usual. Meetings, construction sites, paperwork. Then he returned home, had dinner, and acted as if nothing had changed. Nathan either didn't notice or noticed and chose not to ask. Kevin couldn't tell. One evening, he walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he passed the hallway window that faced Dorothy's yard, he almost kept walking. But something made him glance outside. Dorothy was kneeling in the yard. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were folded. She was praying in front of the statue. It was a little after 7 in the evening. The white paint still stained the statue's face and mantle, exactly the way Kevin had left it weeks earlier. Dorothy had never cleaned it. Kevin stood there silently, staring through the window. He didn't know how long he watched. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Finally, he walked back to his bedroom. But that night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring into the darkness, thinking about things he normally avoided. About the wife who had left years ago when life became difficult. About raising Nathan alone while trying to build a struggling company. About the way he had always handled rejection. Every time Dorothy said no, Kevin had simply returned with a higher number. Because in his world, money solved everything. Around 4 in the morning, Kevin finally gave up trying to sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Kevin Whitfield was not a man who apologized. He had always believed apologies were weakness, that admitting you were wrong simply gave someone else power over you. But that morning something shifted. When the sun came up, Kevin grabbed a bucket, a stiff brush, and a cleaning product strong enough to remove paint. Then he walked into Dorothy's yard. Without saying a word to anyone, he began scrubbing the statue. 5 minutes later, Dorothy's door opened. Kevin didn't stop working. Dorothy stood quietly on the porch watching him. After a moment, she went back inside. When she returned, she carried 2 cups of coffee. Kevin paused and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," Dorothy replied. Kevin took a sip and glanced back at the statue. Most of the paint had come off, but deeper stains had soaked into the concrete. Those wouldn't disappear. "It's not all going to come out," Kevin said quietly. "I know," Dorothy answered. Kevin hesitated. "I shouldn't have done this." Dorothy studied the statue for a moment. Then she said calmly, "No, you shouldn't have." Kevin finished cleaning what he could. He picked up the bucket and walked back home. Something inside him had shifted. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't even have words for it. But it was there. 3 days later, Kevin asked Nathan to sit with him after dinner. He placed the doctor's report on the kitchen table without speaking. Nathan picked it up. As he read, Kevin watched his son's expression slowly change. Nathan lowered the paper and looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Nathan asked. "I didn't want to worry you," Kevin said. Nathan tapped the paper with his finger. "It's heart surgery, Dad." "I know." They sat there in silence for a few moments. Then Nathan asked quietly, "Are you scared?" Kevin thought about it. For a moment, he almost gave his usual answer. But this time he didn't. "A little," he admitted. They talked for nearly half an hour. About the surgery. About what the cardiologist had explained. About how the company would continue running during Kevin's recovery. The conversation was practical, just like Kevin liked. But it was the longest conversation father and son had shared in months. And that alone meant something. One afternoon, Kevin arrived home and saw Dorothy sitting on her porch. He stopped for a moment. "Good afternoon, Dorothy." "Good afternoon, Kevin." Kevin looked across her yard. At the statue. At the faded stains that still marked the concrete. At the large tree growing near the back of the property. "That tree looks old," Kevin said. Dorothy smiled faintly. "My husband planted it when our son Gregory was born," she said. 45 years ago." Kevin kept staring at the tree. It had grown alongside Dorothy's family. Its branches had shaded children playing in the yard. Its roots had been planted in that soil as deeply as the memories inside that house. For 8 months, Kevin had looked at this property and seen only numbers. Square footage. Market value. Future appreciation. Dorothy looked at the same place and saw an entire life. The night before the surgery, Kevin went to bed earlier than usual. Sometime during the night, he woke up. The room was dark, but something caught his eye. In the corner where the wall met the ceiling, there was light. Soft. Diffused. Not coming from the window. Not from the street outside. Inside that quiet glow stood a figure. Feminine. Still. Watching him. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Kevin simply looked back. And strangely, he didn't feel fear. What he felt instead was a deep calm he couldn't explain. A peace that didn't come from any thought. It simply existed. After a few seconds, the light faded. The corner returned to darkness. Kevin lay there with his eyes open for a moment. Then he closed them and slept. The next morning, he woke up early. He had coffee, picked up the bag he had packed the night before, and walked toward the garage. Halfway across the garage, he stopped. There it was. A scent. Strong. Fresh. Roses. Kevin froze. The garage was closed. There were no flowers anywhere in the house. Kevin never kept flowers. But the scent filled the air around him. It lasted less than a minute. Then it disappeared completely. Kevin stood there for a moment longer before getting into the car. He didn't mention it to Nathan. But something about that morning felt different. Kevin felt calm in a way he couldn't explain. A calm that didn't seem to come from inside him. At the hospital, he was admitted and prepared for surgery. Nathan stayed with him the entire time. On the morning of the second day, Dr. Reeves entered the room carrying several test results. "Kevin," the doctor said, placing the papers on the table, "I need to show you something." He explained the area of the heart that had concerned him. He pointed to the previous test results. "At your consultation, I explained that the case looked complicated," Dr. Reeves said. "Yes," Kevin replied. "When we began the procedure, things were different from what the tests indicated." Kevin waited. "The surgery turned out to be much simpler than expected," the doctor continued. "And your recovery is progressing faster than normal for cases like yours." Kevin looked at him. "What exactly are you saying?" Dr. Reeves leaned back slightly. "I'm saying that medically speaking, I don't have a clear explanation for the difference between what the tests showed and what we actually found." Nathan sat quietly in the chair beside the bed. He looked at his father. Neither of them spoke. Do you believe that sometimes things happen without explanation? That something greater might be working quietly around us, even when we don't see it? Kevin remained in the hospital 2 more days. And during that time, something else began to change. Nathan barely left the hospital during those days. He stepped out only long enough to grab something quick to eat before returning to his father's room. During those 2 days, something unusual happened. They talked, more than they had in the last 2 years combined. They spoke about work, about the company, about old memories Kevin had never shared before. For most of his life, Kevin had believed that talking didn't solve anything. Now he realized he had been wrong. Soon Kevin was discharged. Nathan picked him up from the hospital, and they began the drive home. Halfway through the trip, they passed a small flower shop. Kevin suddenly said, "Stop the car." Nathan pulled over. "Buy those roses for me," Kevin said. Nathan looked at his father for a moment, slightly surprised. Then he walked into the shop and returned with a bouquet of fresh roses. He placed the flowers on the back seat without asking a single question. He didn't need to. When they arrived home, Kevin picked up the bouquet and walked toward the fence that separated his yard from Dorothy's. Dorothy was sitting on her porch with a book resting on her lap. She looked up when she saw him. "Kevin," she said gently, closing the book. "How did it go?" "It went well," Kevin answered. He placed the bouquet on the fence on her side. "These are for you." Dorothy looked at the roses for a moment. Then she looked back at Kevin. "Thank you," she said. Kevin shook his head. "No, thank you." Dorothy didn't ask what he meant. Kevin didn't explain. Sometimes explanations aren't necessary. 2 months after the surgery, something new became part of their routine. Twice a week, Kevin and Dorothy would meet at the fence between their yards and share a cup of coffee. Dorothy told stories about her family. Her eldest son Gregory was a lawyer in Columbus. Her younger son Alan taught at a school in the southern part of the state. Both of them called every Sunday. There were 5 grandchildren altogether. They visited during holidays and summer vacations. Kevin learned all of this during those quiet conversations by the fence. He also learned about Dorothy's husband, Robert. Robert had built the wooden porch behind the house with his own hands many years earlier. Kevin didn't say much during these talks, but he listened, really listened. It was something he hadn't done very often before. Nathan noticed the difference in his father. Kevin seemed less closed off, less harsh when something went wrong at a construction site, more willing to hear people out before making decisions. Meanwhile, Dorothy's statue still stood in the yard. Most of the paint had been cleaned away, but the deeper stains remained. They had soaked into the concrete and were never going to disappear completely. Some things in life are like that. Mistakes that leave marks. Perhaps they are meant to stay, not as punishment, but as reminders. Reminders of who we once were and who we became afterward. Before we finish, I want to invite you to join our Virgin Mary prayer community. People from different parts of the world united by faith. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this prayer chain, click the button below, become a channel member, and come pray with us. And if you stayed with us all the way to the end of Kevin and Dorothy's story, do something for me. Write one word in the comments. Paint. Because this story began with paint, and it ended with something far greater. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read that word, I'll know that one more person believes miracles still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share in the comments any miracle you've witnessed or experienced. And send this video to someone who might need a little hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.